The summer of 1878 in the high mountains of Wyoming was a place where silence wasn't peace. It was judgment. Robert Boone had lived in that silence for over a decade. A self-imposed exile after the Civil War had stolen his wife and child in a burst of senseless crossfire. The abandoned military station he called home sat hidden among pines and granite cliffs, far from towns, far from voices, far from the orders of men who mistook cruelty for duty. He had built his life around stillness, speaking only to the wind, listening only to the creak of the old cabin in the night. That morning, the stillness broke. He noticed it first as a strange shape against the ridge beam of his roof, a silhouette too rigid to be anything but wrong. Boots crunching over pine needles, he stepped outside, and the shape resolved into horror. A woman hung from the beam, her feet dangling above the doorway. Blonde hair spilled like straw over the scorched word branded into the wood below, Apache Lover. The smell of charred pine bit at his nose, sharp as the memory of burning villages. His stomach knotted. Instinct made his hand reach for the pistol under his coat, but instinct could not explain the sudden absence of any will to kill. He moved closer, slow, as if noise alone might finish her. Her chest rose, barely. A shallow, fragile breath. Dirt and dried blood clung to her pale face, lashes pressed tight against her cheeks. She wasn't dead. Not yet. Robert slid his arms under her, with the care of a man afraid she might shatter. Her weight leaned into him, light as a bird, bones too sharp beneath torn cloth. Slinging her over his shoulder, he turned from the cabin and headed down toward the lean-to by the stream. That's when the first gunshot cracked through the forest. It was distant but close enough to rattle the pines. More followed, echoing in bursts. Someone knew she was alive. Someone wanted her dead. His boots skidded over loose rock, branches clawing at his coat as he ran. Every step was a gamble between salvation and pursuit. When he reached the clearing, he laid her down on the bed of furs he kept for emergencies. Her hair, tangled, golden, spilled across the pelts like sunlight trapped in shadow. He lifted her chin, searching for signs of life. Her breath caught once in a shaky gasp. Only then did he realize he'd been holding his own. The forest beyond was silent now, but silence meant nothing in these hills. He had no name for her, no reason to risk himself, and yet something deep and old moved inside him, the same force that had made him bury his family with his own hands rather than leave them to strangers. She was alive, and in that moment, Robert Boone decided she would not die here. Not by rope, not by fire, not by the vengeance of men who mistook hate for justice. Robert stayed by her side through the morning, his hands moving with a precision born not of training but of loss. He'd seen wounds before, battlefield injuries, shattered bodies, the slow bleed of those left too long in the dirt. But this was different. This wasn't war between soldiers. This was cruelty delivered in broad daylight under the smug eyes of men who believed they were righteous. He brought water from the spring, the cold biting into his fingers as if to keep him from forgetting what he was doing. He cleaned the cuts on her wrists where the rope had eaten deep into the skin, wrapped them with linen torn from his oldest shirt. Her face was a map of exhaustion and pain, streaked with grime, but when he brushed away the dirt, he found a stubborn strength beneath it. For hours she hovered between fevered dreams and shallow breaths. When she stirred for the first time, it was with a whisper, just a single name. Buru Hambor. The sound was like a broken chord, trembling in the air before dissolving into silence. Robert didn't know the name, but the way she clung to it even in delirium told him it was not a curse. It was an anchor. That night, the fever worsened. Her skin burned hot under his hand, her lips dry, her body caught between shivering and stillness. She woke once in a panic, her arms flailing, clawing at her neck as though the rope were still there. "Get away, let me go. I'll die before you take me back." Her voice cracked like a whip in the small shelter. Robert caught her wrists, not to restrain her but to keep her from hurting herself. "You're safe," he said, voice steady but quiet. "You're not there anymore." She fought against him like a cornered animal, eyes wide with terror, until her strength gave out. She collapsed into his arms, trembling. For a moment, her weight pressed against him, not seeking comfort, but finding it despite herself. When she could finally form the words, her voice was barely audible. "Who are you?" "Robert," he said. "Robert Boone. This is my place. What's left of it. You found me." Her gaze flickered, a guarded light in her fevered eyes. "My name is Annabeth. Annabeth Cowley." The name hit him like a musket shot. He'd seen it before, inked on the orders that sent men into Apache lands to burn villages that had done nothing but exist. Orders signed by Nathaniel Cooley, plantation baron, cattle lord, and self-proclaimed purifier of borders. Her father. She didn't see his expression shift. She kept talking, voice tight, as if every sentence was a wound opening. She'd run away after he hit her for the last time. She'd met someone, an Apache man named Toma, who had pulled her bleeding from a creek behind their land. He told her no one was born an enemy. She loved him, learned his language, wore his mother's beads, slept under the stars beside him. Then came winter. White men, some she knew, some her father paid, ambushed them. Toma died protecting her. She never screamed. They tied her, burned her, dragged her from town to town as an example. This was what happened to a white woman who dared to love across the line. Robert listened in silence, his jaw tightening. He could see it in his mind, the torches, the jeering faces, the arrogance of men who thought pain was a form of teaching. "You can hate me," she said finally. "Everyone else does." "I don't," Robert replied, his voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "You think I betrayed my kind?" "No," he said. "I think the ones who say that never knew what love looked like." Her lip trembled. "I should have died with him." "You didn't," Robert said, stirring the embers. "That ain't betrayal. That's survival. And only cowards fear a soul brave enough to love across a line." For the first time since she had been strung up on that beam, she cried without hiding her face. It wasn't the sharp sob of panic, but the low, aching release of someone who had carried too much for too long. Robert let her be. He didn't try to fix the tears or the memories behind them. He just stayed there, his presence steady in the shifting shadows. Outside, the pines whispered as the night deepened. In the days that followed, he built her a separate shelter deeper in the woods, a place that was hers, not his. He laid new blankets, mended the roof, and planted herbs by the door. When she found it, she stood silent for a long time before saying, "I never asked for this." "You didn't need to," he answered. She stepped inside, sat on the bedding, and stared out at the small garden. Slowly, silently, she began to cry again. But this time, the tears carried something different. Something almost like trust. Robert didn't know if she would stay, if the men who hurt her would return, or if the mountains could keep them safe. He only knew one thing. The world had decided she wasn't worth saving. He was done agreeing with it. If this story has stirred something in you, if it's made you believe in the strength to heal, in the courage to protect without owning, and in the quiet power of trust, then don't let it fade here. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because out here in the Wild West, every love that survives leaves a trail, and some trails deserve to be followed. The mountains have a way of carrying whispers. And in that corner of Wyoming, whispers moved faster than wind. By the time Annabeth could walk without leaning on the doorframe, the silence outside their clearing had changed. It wasn't the calm of snow or pine. It was the quiet that comes before teeth sink in. Robert felt it first. Years in the war had taught him that danger didn't announce itself with noise. It arrived in the stillness. He'd been bringing in water from the stream when a figure appeared on the trail, hat in hand, eyes darting. It was a local trader he barely knew. "I don't want no trouble, Boone," the man began, shifting from foot to foot. "But you ought to know. There's a bounty, quiet one, posted in coins and cattle. Apache Lover's head brings it in real clean." Robert's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. "I seen you once with her near the creek," the man added, glancing toward the cabin. "Just figured you ought to know what's coming." And then he left as quickly as he'd arrived, his boots hurrying down the trail like he feared the wind might carry his guilt back to him. Inside, Annabeth had heard every word. She was already packing when Robert stepped through the door. Her hands moved fast, stuffing clothes and the small pouch of beads she kept hidden under the bedding into a worn satchel. I have to go, she said, not looking at him. They'll kill you if they find me here. They'll kill you if you go, he replied. She stopped, her shoulders rigid. You saved me once. I'm not asking you to do it twice. Robert's voice was quiet, but there was an edge in it now, steel buried under the calm. I lost a wife and child because I followed orders. I stood still when I should have spoken, watched fire take everything and called it fate. I won't do that again. Her eyes met his for the first time since the traitor left. You're not baggage, he continued. You're not a burden. You're a human being. And I'm done pretending the world gets to decide which ones are worth protecting. The fight in her gaze softened, but it didn't vanish. They'll come. I know. That night, Robert went into the woods alone. He moved like a shadow, quiet, calculated, unseen. He had not carried a weapon in years, but that didn't mean he'd forgotten how to survive. He set a perimeter of alarms, old tin cups strung on wire, glass shards tied to branches that would shatter if moved, trip lines that would pull loose stones down from the ridge. They weren't meant to kill, only to slow. By the time he returned, the eastern sky was graying toward dawn. Annabeth sat by the fire, fingers wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. You could have run, she said. I could have, he agreed. Why didn't you? He looked at her for a long moment. Because I've seen men fight to possess, to own, to chain. That's not why I'm here. Then why? I just want you to live. Her throat tightened too fast for words. No one had ever said that to her before, not even Toma. People had wanted her silent, loyal, useful, beautiful. No one had simply wanted her breathing. For the first time in her life, Annabeth Cowley didn't feel like someone running. She felt seen. But danger doesn't wait for the heart to catch up. The wind shifted at sundown the next day, carrying the faintest tremor of hoofbeats. Robert heard it before the forest did. He rose from his cot and slipped into his coat, checking the traps. 3 had been tripped, but no sound had followed. Someone was moving with care. Too much care. He opened the cabin door without a word. Annabeth looked up, reading his face before he spoke. They're here, she said. He nodded. Stay inside, no lights, no sound. I can help. I need you alive more than I need help. And then he was gone, melting into the trees. 3 men moved through the forest, their shapes shifting between shadows. One carried a rope, another a long knife, the third a bottle of kerosene. Their whispers floated ahead of them, vile promises disguised as jokes. Robert circled wide, taking the high ground. He dropped behind the last man and struck fast. An elbow to the throat, a twist of the wrist, the knife tumbling to the dirt. The second turned, raising his blade, but caught a punch that snapped his head back. The third man spotted him and shouted, drawing a revolver. Gunfire cracked through the pines. Back at the cabin, Annabeth froze at the sound, her pulse hammering. Then she grabbed the oil lantern, a flint, and ran. Robert fought like a man who despised violence but knew its language too well. The 2 remaining attackers pressed him hard, blades flashing in the dim light. Then the forest itself erupted. Not from the moon, from flame. The fire Annabeth started leapt from bush to branch, devouring the dry underbrush. Heat rolled over them, turning the air into a furnace. The attackers faltered, coughing against the smoke. Robert used the moment to break one man's leg and drag the other into the dirt before fleeing toward the glow. He found her near the base of a ridge, hair damp with sweat, dress singed, holding a burning branch like a weapon. You set the woods on fire, he said, a trace of disbelief in his voice. Just a little, she rasped. You could have died. I know, he searched her eyes. Would you have died for me? She swallowed. Number I want to live for you. The cave they found that night was narrow and damp, but safe enough. They lay side by side in the dark, their breathing the only sound. Outside, the forest burned, but inside something else had caught fire, and neither of them would run from it. By the time the fire in the forest had burned itself down to embers, the sky was already heavy with a new day. Smoke clung to their hair, their clothes, their skin. Robert and Annabeth made the slow climb out of the canyon, moving with the wary silence of people who knew the danger wasn't gone. only delayed. They didn't speak much during the descent into the lowlands. Both were thinking of the same thing. Radek. In Dustwater, news traveled in two directions, fast to those who wanted blood, slow to those who might stop it. Robert knew that if Radek had caught the scent, the only way forward wasn't hiding. It was dragging the truth into the open where even silence couldn't smother it. When they reached the outer edge of town, Robert kept his hat low, his step even. Annabeth stayed in the wagon they'd borrowed, hood drawn over her face. She scanned every shadow, every glint of silver at a man's belt. In the trading post, Robert lingered near the back, pretending to study sacks of flour while listening. Two ranch hands at the counter spoke over the sound of a scoop dragging through sugar. "Clayton Radek is coming by week's end," one said. "Got business with the mayor?" the other asked. "Or something more personal," the first replied. "Bounty hunting, maybe." Robert's hand tightened on the bag of flour until the paper crinkled. He left without a word. Down the hill, Annabeth's eyes found him before his boots even hit the wagon step. "Did you hear his name?" "Yes." "Then it's him." From her satchel, she drew a piece of tanned leather, blackened at the edges, brittle where the fire had kissed it. This had been nailed to the cabin door above her head the day he'd found her hanging there. The brand read Apache Lover. Robert had always thought it was just a crude slur, burned by some nameless hand. But Annabeth turned it in the light, tracing the letters with her finger. "The angle of the A, the way the P dips, this isn't a brand stamp, it's handwriting." "You recognize it?" She nodded. "Radek used to write to my father. Threats, warnings, offers. They hated the same people. The only difference was my father used gold. Radek used fire. He wrote to Toma once, too, called him a mud-skinned thief, promised to hang him at the town gates." Her voice faltered, but her hands were steady. "It's the same hand that wrote this." Robert stared at the leather. "He's not just hunting us, he's hunting memory. He wants everyone who ever loved an Apache to disappear." "Then we remind them," she said. That night, they broke into the parlor behind the old church, where donations, records, and letters were kept in boxes lined with dust. Annabeth found what she was looking for: a draft of one of Radek's letters to her father, half-burned but still legible, containing the same threats, the same slur, in the same curling script. They brought it to the new deputy marshal, a young man who had the look of someone still deciding what kind of lawman he wanted to be. Robert laid the branded leather on the desk beside the letter. "We're not here to hang anyone," Robert said. "We're here to show you the rope." The deputy studied the items, then met Robert's gaze. "Radek arrives Friday. He's been gathering men. If this is true, people ought to know who they're letting in." Annabeth stepped forward. "I don't need them to love me. I just need them to see me as a person, not a warning sign." Friday came with a hard sun, baking the town square in white light. Dustwater hadn't seen this many people in years. The mayor sat at a table on the courthouse steps, flanked by elders and deputies who gripped their chair arms as if expecting a fight. Robert stood before them, the packet of evidence in his hand. He began with the letter. Radek's handwriting, his threats, his hatred recorded in ink. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then Robert held up the burned leather, the brand seared into it by the same hand. Finally, he produced a war photograph, faded, grainy. It showed soldiers in front of a burning Apache village. At the front stood a tall man with a distinctive long-barreled revolver. "That weapon," Robert said, turning toward the mayor, "is custom. Only 6 were made for Wyoming militia field captains." One belonged to Clayton Radek, standing to the side, barked out, "This is a circus, stories from a recluse and a woman who betrayed her own blood." His words drew a few nods, but not many. Then a voice cracked through the square. "I was there." An old man stepped forward from the shade, leaning on a cane. "Radek gave the order. No quarter, no captives. We attacked before dawn. Burned everything." His eyes met Robert's. "That was the night your wife and daughter died." The square fell silent. Annabeth walked forward without an escort, without fear. She untied the back of her blouse, letting it fall to reveal her scars, raised, twisted, still red at the edges. "These weren't left by Apache blades," she said, her voice steady. "They were given to me by white hands, Christian hands, men who said they were saving me from sin." She turned to Radek. "You didn't hang me to punish love. You did it to silence it." No one clapped, no one shouted, but no one looked at Radek the same again. By evening, the decision was made. Radek was taken away, not to cheers, but to a silence heavier than any gallows rope. They didn't stay to see the gallows built. At first light, Robert and Annabeth rode out of Dustwater, the rising sun painting the mountains in shades of copper and fire. The town that had once been proud of its silence now stood hushed for another reason. Truth had been spoken in its square, and no one could unhear it. Their path wound through narrow ridges and over high meadows until, after 3 days, they reached the old hunting cabin on the ridge. Time had not been kind to it. The door sagged on one hinge, the windows were cracked, the roof bowed under years of snow. But Robert didn't see ruin. He saw work worth doing. He fixed the door first, not with urgency but with care, as if every nail was a promise. Annabeth gathered pine needles for bedding, stripped bark to boil for medicine, and planted beans and squash in the clearing. They moved around each other without the need for many words, their silences no longer heavy with fear but full of quiet purpose. Weeks passed, and the place began to change. The smell of fresh-cut wood replaced the scent of old rot. Blue wildflowers grew by the door, their ash-painted petals swaying in the mountain wind. Annabeth's touch, a mark of peace where there had once been only survival. They weren't alone for long. A boy whose parents had cast him out for marrying a Cheyenne girl arrived with nothing but the clothes on his back. A woman with a scar down her cheek came next, carrying the weight of stories she wasn't ready to tell. Even a limping horse found its way there, wounded by a hunter's bullet, now grazing in the meadow. The cabin became more than shelter. It became a place where the unwanted could return to themselves. Robert, who had once believed he had nothing left to give, found himself building an extra room, teaching the boy how to split wood, listening without judgment to the quiet confessions shared over the fire. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the ridge and stained the mountains in a red gold, Robert walked up the path to where Annabeth stood near the fence. Dust clung to his boots, his hat was in his hand, and his eyes were steady. "You don't need to say yes," he murmured. "There's no ring, no preacher, no toast. I just need to know you'll be here when the sun drops behind that tree. And the next night. And the next." She stepped closer, hands resting lightly on his shirt. "Toma was my first storm. He broke the locks on my cage. But you," her voice trembled, "you taught me stillness. That love doesn't have to be lightning to be real. It can be the sound of wood creaking under moonlight, the scent of smoke on flannel." Robert said nothing. He only rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow would be memory. Today was theirs. And in the cabin on the ridge, the fire never went out. If this story has moved you, if it's made you believe in second chances, in love that heals, and in the quiet strength of choosing kindness over fear, like this video, subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because in the Wild West, every love that survives leaves a trail, and some trails are worth following.